Peace. Very, very interesting conversation that I caught on First Take on an episode that I had DVR'd. They got into a conversation on the Confederate flag, and I just wanted to go over some things that they spoke about in the conversation.
A small group of protesters flew a Confederate flag from the top of a parking lot outside the arena that was hosting the NCAA tournament games on Sunday. The NCAA lifted its ban against South Carolina holding championships in 2015 after they agreed to no longer fly the Confederate flag on public property in arenas, in areas surrounding the arena. Max, I want to start with you here. Will Kane also back with us. Will, good to have you. What is your reaction to this?
Well, I defend their right, as protected by the First Amendment, to make that statement. The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, the document that the South fought not to be bound by.
Here go the ramblings and the rants of a white liberal, a guy who is also hooked on prescription drugs, allegedly.
I mean, the North American slave trade, I also have free right protection, free speech protection, and I'll exercise that right now.
You don't have to give that disclaimer before you make your statement, Max.
The North American slave trade was an unprecedented crime against humanity. The Civil War was about slavery.
That's a lie. The Civil War was not about slavery. The Civil War actually was fought. It was actually fought to maintain the Union on a part of the North. They fought to maintain the Union. And it was also fought, honestly, to establish a central bank in America. All right. Lincoln did not want a central bank installed because he understood that a foreign power would be able to control the flow of money if they had a central bank installed. So what the central bank of England did was they started an insurrection by forming a group called the Knights of the Golden Circle. All right. Not to go off on a tangent, but the central bank of Inner London, they started an insurrection in the southern states by starting a group called the Knights of the Golden Circle. And their job was to spread secession throughout the southern states. So that each southern state would have its own central bank. And then therefore after that, the central bank in England would be able to start little wars amongst each of the southern states by controlling the amount of money that was loaned to each southern state bank. All right. That's the point of having banks or having central banks. When you control the bank, you control the flow of the money. You understand? So that's why whenever you get a country to fight wars, they must borrow money from a foreign bank because these countries do not have the ability to print their own money. All right. They don't have the ability to print their own money. They actually have to be authorized and given money by the foreign banks. So the foreign banks wanted to establish a central bank in America. Lincoln did not want that. So they started secession in the southern states. America understood that they could not survive without the income of the southern states. The southern states have pulled all their money out of the U.S. Treasury. All right, look, it's a long story. I'm not really trying to make it a history channel, but I mean, there's so much fake history that's reported, trying to make people think that they fought to free so-called blacks or so-called slaves. The Civil War had nothing to do with that. Lincoln really did not care about the slaves. The only reason why he ended up freeing the slaves in the Emancipation Proclamation was as a show of solidarity with Russia, because Russia had just freed their slaves the year before, and he needed Russia to help him side up with the North against the South because England and France had sided up with the South. All right. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot that went on at that time period that's not taught in schools, like the fact that Lincoln's Secretary of the Treasury was Salmon Chase, the same Salmon Chase who's the namesake of the Chase National Bank or the Chase Manhattan Bank, who teamed up with J.P. Morgan. Now you have J.P. Morgan and Chase Bank. All right. point being, it's very, very important for brothers to understand, and anybody who's listening to understand how these different things actually came about, how these events actually transpired. The Civil War was not fought over liberating the so-called slaves. Lincoln was on record as saying that he actually wanted to have the slaves deported to Panama, I believe it was, the so-called black slaves, anyway, because you had white slaves as well. All right, but no, the Civil War was not fought for the so-called modern white liberal self-guilt narrative of the Black Holocaust, so-called Black Holocaust, or slavery. That's nonsense.
The Confederate battle flag represents the fight for slavery. So people...
Well, no, the Confederate battle flag actually represents it actually represents their belief in a lot of, what people will call today Masonry, but just in adherence to a lot of the ancient methods of worship, right? The Confederates, they were into, or the elite amongst the Confederates, like I said before, they were agents of the foreign national bank powers, right? Jefferson Davis, Jesse James, if you know who Jesse James, the so-called bank robber, he was actually robbing banks to continue to fund another civil war. All right. He was a member of the Knights of the Golden Circle, which went on to become known as the Ku Klux Klan. All right. Jesse James's father, I can't remember his name, but Jesse James's father was actually the Confederate soldier that fired off the first shot in the Civil War at Fort Sumter. All right. Like I said, there's a lot that went on in history that does not get told to the average person because they want you to believe narratives. All right. The sports media is an extension of that. They want to perpetuate narratives. But the Confederate flag is based in the occult. All right. That's why they have the X going across with the 13 stars. But like I said, the South, they wanted to set up the South as a small republic of different states that would each have their own national bank, and the foreign banks could install a central bank in each state and have each state fighting amongst each other. And when they fought amongst each other, they would have to borrow money from the central bank, and they would be perpetually in debt. That's the point of wanting to establish a central bank. They want to be able to loan money to these different countries so that they will be perpetually in debt. Like I said before, everything is about the money. Everything is about the money. The money that we use today is not real money. So now, like I said before, Lincoln went off because Lincoln did not want to allow a central bank because he knew that would give the power over the country to the foreign bankers. So he actually created his own form of money, of fiat money, which basically fiat money is money that has no gold backing it, called a greenback. All right, that's when they decided that they were going to have him put to death. All right, John Wilkes Booth was an agent of the Knights of the Golden Circle. All right, they were going to have Lincoln assassinated, his vice president Andrew Jackson assassinated, or Andrew Johnson, pardon me, and the Secretary of State. I can't remember the Secretary of State's name right now. It's kind of slipped my mind. But the Secretary of War was going to take power because he was part of the conspiracy. So they were going to kill the top 3 guys, and he was going to assume power. I believe his name was Stanton. All right. Now, Stanton actually, after Lincoln was assassinated, he blocked off every road except for the road that John Wilkes Booth took to escape, because Stanton was down with the quote unquote conspiracy. All right. So Stanton was going to be put into the White House, but it didn't work because they were only able to get Lincoln. So they found Booth. And the funny thing is that when they confiscated John Wilkes Booth's diary, he had pages ripped out because John Wilkes Booth had written down the names of numerous senators and dignitaries that were complicit in the conspiracy to get rid of Lincoln because they needed to have a central bank installed so that the foreign bankers could control America. All right. So, like I said before, there's a lot that goes into it. It annoys me when they say that the Civil War was fought to free the slaves. They didn't care about the so-called slaves or the so-called blacks or whatever you want to call the people that they claim were just slaves. If you notice, right after the Civil War, what did they do? They wanted to have as many blacks as they could brought up to the North because because what? The so-called blacks were cheap labor, right? The North could not allow the South to have free slave labor because the South would have all become rich and the North would have been depleted, right? The North was broke. The treasury was empty. So they literally had to fight the South to bring them back into the fold. That's another reason why Lincoln wanted to so-called free the slaves, not to liberate so-called blacks, but to take away the workforce of the South, to cripple them. All right.
People who are very offended by the kidnapping, torture, and murder of millions are going to be very offended by this.
So then, Max Kellerman, you being a Caucasian Jew, why don't you lead the charge for restitution of everything that has been taken? Right? We know that you're not going to do that. Your job is to get on TV and play the black liberal and try to make inflammatory comments.
I am one of those people. So I would ask those who are raising that flag, what kind of person are you?
I think that they're declaring what type of person they are by raising that flag. All right. They're a person who has a certain set of beliefs. They don't like so-called people of color. And that's their business. That's their prerogative.
Well, I can't answer that specifically, Max, because I'm not someone who raises that flag, nor am I someone who wears that flag on any kind of T-shirt or anything like that.
And yet you're probably about to defend it.
But I'll ask some questions back to you and Stephen A. First of all, let me start with this. I completely understand any African American, or for that matter, any human being like Max, for example, that says that's exactly and only what they see in the Confederate flag. A symbolism of enslavement, a symbolism of oppression, and there's nothing more to that flag than that specific symbol. I understand.
In addition to that, it's a symbol of sedition, right? Any so-called American that flies a so-called Confederate flag should be considered a terrorist. The Confederate flag was created as an act of sedition, right? An act of secession against the Union, against the government. Any so-called person seen flying or representing or utilizing a Confederate flag should be considered and classified a terrorist as per the Patriot Act. Right? But they're not going to do that. So a lot of this nonsense about the Confederate flag is much ado about nothing. But let's see what they have to say.
Understand that point of view. I sympathize with that point of view. And it's one that I personally want to be sensitive toward. That's why I don't raise it. That's why I don't wear the flag. I don't want to send any kind of message like that. I also recognize this, that there are people who do, Max, raise that flag to this day, wear that paraphernalia to this day for those exact reasons, perhaps pining for the days of that evil institution. But here's the question I would ask you and Stephen A. Is that truly all that symbol stands for today? Is it limited to that? When a girl wears that on a bikini at spring break in Alabama, is that the message she's sending? Is that what she's trying to say? That she's pining for the days of slavery? When the
Yes, actually it is, because that's predominantly what it stands for amongst so-called white trash in the South. The vast majority of them didn't even own slaves. They did not have enough money to own slaves. Like I said before, the vast majority of so-called Caucasians in America are the descendants of white trash. They are not the descendants of slave owners. All right.
General Lee put it on its car during the Dukes of Hazzard. Was that the message that it was advocating for? We just wish for the days? I mean, I'm going to let you guys both answer, but I think you're probably going to agree with me. No, it does stand for something else. It does stand for regional identity, regional pride. The South does maintain pride in its geographic identity, for its culture.
Yes, for its history of secession. How can you have a flag represent regional pride? There's no other section of the United States that adheres to a sentiment like that. That's nonsense. That's him trying to justify them holding on to their days of attempted secession and sedition. Like I said, that should be classified as a federal offense to fly a so-called Confederate flag. And I'm not saying that as somebody who's personally affected by it. Like I said, that's their business. But from a purely logistical standpoint, that is an act of sedition. All right. But we're going to continue this because this is probably going to be multiple parts. All right. Peace.